Week 7 of the fantasy football season is right around the corner, and in today's video, I'm going to break down all 15 matchups at the wide receiver position and tell you whether you should start or sit the wide receivers in every single game, as well as discuss where I believe they'll finish by the end of the week. Before we can get into things, though, I would like to ask that if you are new to the channel and you do end up enjoying today's video, that you please make sure to hit that subscribe button down below. So without further ado, let's get into today's video. We begin with Thursday Night Football, an AFC North showdown, the Pittsburgh Steelers at the Cincinnati Bengals, what people are calling as the Icy Hot Bowl. DK Metcalf has been running hot like Jennifer Lawrence on the beach in No Hard Feelings. Back-to-back top 10 showings with a touchdown now in 4 straight games. Last week up against the Browns, Metcalf was the wide receiver 10 with 4 receptions on 9 targets for 95 yards and a touchdown. So with him catching fire like Jennifer Lawrence in a different movie, The Hunger Games, facing the Bengals in the 12th best matchup for wide receivers on a per-game basis, I feel great about Metcalf as a high-end wide receiver too. Any wide receiver not named DK Metcalf is as useful as an umbrella when it isn't raining. No need to play any non-Metcalf pass catcher on this team, and that it includes the tight ends. For the Cincinnati Bengals, Ja'Marr Chase has put belt to ass in back-to-back showings. I know it may have sounded like I glazed Metcalf a bit just before, but Chase has been even better. Top 5 wide receiver in back-to-back showings in week number 5 with Jake Browning and week number 6 with geriatric Joe Flacco against the Packers in Lambeau last week. In that game, he had 10 receptions on 12 targets for 94 yards and a touchdown with 1 rush for -3 yards. While the Joe Flacco experiment may not end very well, and I fear for the man's life up against the Packers defense, knowing just how rough the Bengals offensive line is, but even with so many down games this year for Ja'Marr Chase, you just keep playing him. And because you know that the upside here is 30 plus points in any given game, even with a guy like Joe Flacco under center, and even in a lower scoring game, which I would expect this game to be, in a mid-range matchup for wide receivers, I still have Ja'Marr Chase as a top 6 option. Now, T. Higgins has been all right over the last 2 weeks. Nothing crazy, nothing special. You didn't win because you had T. Higgins in your lineup, but you've been okay, right? 11.2 points in PPR in back-to-back games, which is kind of crazy to score the exact same point total, but he is going to be serviceable. Again, nothing crazy out of T. Higgins. I wouldn't expect anything crazy out of T. Higgins. As long as Flacco can just throw the ball to him 7+ times in this game, Higgins will be fine. And if he scores, you could end up seeing him finish as a top 24 wide receiver. Obviously, this is far cry from what we expected in the summer when we drafted him as high as we did, when I banged the drum, gave him the metaphorical gawk 9,000 special. But hey, at least he's a fine wide receiver 3. Again, not what we drafted for, but it's okay. 5 receptions on 8 targets for 62 yards in Green Bay last week as the wide receiver 28. I got him as a low-end wide receiver 3 that, again, I am far from ecstatic to play. Joe Flacco may be able to save this offense, but even if he revives this offense quickly, utilizing the quick revive perk, that does not make Andre Yoshivas magically a start. If I wasn't starting him with Joe Burrow healthy, I'm not going to be starting him with Joe Flacco. Now we move to the United Kingdom, Wembley, Sunday, 9:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. The LA Rams going up against the Jacksonville Jaguars. This game is technically at the Jacksonville Jaguars, but sadly this game isn't in Duval. It's in the United Kingdom. This game might actually be a sneaky good game to wake up to. Now, Puka Nacua is dealing with an ankle injury that made him miss about half of the game last week up against the Ravens. It is important to note that for one, this game is being played in the UK and not in Jacksonville, and that could be part of the reason as to why he does end up missing, since maybe he's not able to get the rehab needed for the day that they end up traveling. Also, the team is on bye next week. So in a game that they could definitely win without Puka Nacua, I see no reason to force him back with a team that has as high of aspirations as the Rams do, right? No need to force him back. Sure, if this was like week 18, you win, you get in the playoffs, then sure. Force Puka Nacua back, I get it, but it's week 7. in the United Kingdom up against the Jaguars, right? I think you can win this game without him. So my assumption would be that Puka Nacua does not play. If somehow he does play, even hobbled, you would have to play him as a top 12 wide receiver. If he is out, which again, I do believe will be the case, Davante Adams should be a locked and loaded top 8 option in the 8th best matchup for wide receivers on a per game basis. Adams was down bad last week, but the whole team as a whole offensively was just completely limp dick in Baltimore. I expect a strong bounce back here with Adams' best game yet in the United Kingdom. Now, if you are in a scenario where one of your wide receivers is hurt, you're dealing with the bye weeks, maybe Puka was the guy on your team and now you need a fill-in, then to me, the dart throw fill-in option would be Jordan Whittington. Are you bipolar? I'm by winning. Shout out to Charlie Sheen. 92% of the snaps last year with last week with 3 receptions on 4 targets for 23 yards and is the most likely guy to fill in the Puka Nacua role. Last year, he had a big showing up against the Packers. So while I wouldn't bet on my gold doubloons of him being a certified smash in a good matchup, he is in that wide receiver 4 YOLO start range. Tutu Atwell being active does really concern me, throws much more of a wrench into things, so it makes Jordan Whittington even more of a scary start than he even would have been without him. Again, this is really just break glass in case of emergency. You fire up Jordan Whittington. Tutu Atwell is one of those guys that will randomly have 2 catches on 4 targets for 100 plus yards and a touchdown, and you are not even going to be remotely shocked just due to how he plays and his connection with Matthew Stafford. So without Puka, maybe this is one of those weeks where he ends up exploding, but with my assumption that Whittington gets more usage and plays more snaps, I would just leave him on the waivers. For the Jacksonville Jaguars, those of you that waited with Brian Thomas Jr., those of you that didn't ship him off for a half-eaten bag of potato chips and a used condom, you have been paid in full, Dustin Poirier style. Wide receiver 7 last week up against the Seahawks with 8 receptions on 10 targets for 90 yards and a touchdown. Last week, I talked about how I felt as though him and Trevor Lawrence's connection has gotten a lot better, and that was 100% correct. I thought the big game was coming, and that was the case. This is the 25th best matchup for wide receivers, so I am certainly worried about a potential come back down to earth game here, especially in an overseas game, but with BTJ looking so good last week, I do have him still ranked as a high-end wide receiver number 2. For Travis Hunter, this is a guy that's consistent, right? But he's consistently inconsistent, right? And has still yet to crack the 10-point mark in PPR a single time this season. Last week up against Seattle, he had his 2nd highest amount of targets with 7, turning that into 4 receptions for 15 yards. His snap share is all over the place, and he played the highest number of offensive snaps this season. Last week was 78%. I don't think at this point you should even really consider playing him, especially in a matchup like this, which is bad for wide receivers. So I would leave him on the bench. He is a clear sit. And if any of you guys have cut Travis Hunter, I'm not going to judge you about that. Diami Brown played the 3rd most snaps last week out of the Jaguars wide receivers, but has been outscored a few times by Parker Washington. The only startable wide receiver on this team is BTJ. Now we move to the 1 p.m. slate over on Sunday, the New Orleans Saints at the Chicago Bears. Now, last week up against the Patriots at home in New Orleans, Chris Olave had his best fantasy day and his highest receiving yard total on the season. 6 receptions on 10 targets for 98 yards as the wide receiver 18 in full PPR. Now, I say this every single week, but it is still the same fucking thing. This offense and their quarterback Spencer Rattler are truly not good enough to have Olave as a consistent high-end option. But the guy sees so many targets and he is so involved in the offense that he flirts with a top 24 ranking weekly. This week against a defense that allows the 7th most points to the wide receiver position on a weekly basis, Olave is a low-end wide receiver 2 for me on the week. Now, there are a lot of talks. The rumor mill, the birdies are chirping, saying that Chris Olave may get traded. We shall see if that ends up being the case or not. I wouldn't necessarily, bet my life savings on that, but I do think it is more likely than not that he does end up getting moved. There's a bunch of teams that are rumored to potentially trade for him, so we're not going to talk too much about that because You know, if I start talking about, oh, he's going to the Patriots and he doesn't get traded, or he's going to the Bills and he doesn't go to one of those teams, right? We're just wasting our time. I'm Rashid Shaheed is only start worthy due to the fact that this is such a great matchup. At this point in the season, you know exactly who he is. A wide receiver 4 dart throw start. He should get you 8+ points, but I really don't look for a guy that's going to just get me like a 8-point floor. You could just find that on the waiver wire picking up any given scrub. The thing about Shaheed, though, is that he has solid speed. He's got great burst and could bust off a game like up against the Giants just a few weeks ago, where he has 4 receptions on 5 targets for 114 yards and a touchdown. So if you're down bad and need to play Shaheed, go ahead. But this is far from a very strong recommendation to actually do so. For Brandon Cooks, regardless of how good and how juicy this matchup may be, no one should be starting Brandon Cooks in 2025. According to Underdog on Twitter, a few missed deep shots from Caleb Williams and an illegal formation penalty held Rome Odunze back from a 35.1 point performance. And in my opinion, that illegal formation penalty was straight up Fugazi. I was shocked that they threw the flag for that. Odunze finished instead as the wide receiver 63 in Washington with 2 receptions on 5 targets for 36 yards. Prior to the bye week, he was a top 20 wide receiver in all 4 games with a touchdown in every single game and 5 touchdowns through that stretch. So 1 down game shouldn't break your spirit. It shouldn't. You won't break my soul, right? It's not going to break my soul here. In the 9th best matchup for wide receivers on a weekly basis, the bounce back is inevitable for Rome Odunze. Wiki, DJ Moore is day-to-day with a groin injury that hospitalized him after the game. I don't want to speculate about what exactly is going to lead for you to be hospitalized with a groin injury, but that legitimately must have hurt so fucking bad if you had to be in the hospital for a while after the game. He is listed as day-to-day, so I do think he could play, but I'm just kind of so fucking sick of this dude at this point. With Rome Odunze in the driver's seat as the wide receiver 1, DJ Moore has just been a huge disappointment. He has only scored more than 10 PPR points a single time this season, so if you want 8 points, go right ahead, but the upside doesn't even seem the same as Shaheed, so I would just sit him even in a positive matchup. Luther Burden looked good last week with 4 receptions on 4 targets for 51 yards, but until they allocate more snaps to go his way, you can't possibly start him. He just doesn't touch the field enough. He hasn't played more than 30% of the snaps a single time this season. Now we move to the Miami Dolphins at the Cleveland Browns, but before we break down this game in depth at the wide receiver position, as well as the rest of the games in week number 7, I would like to give you guys a quick word for our friends and our partner over at Underdog. If you're brand new to Underdog and sign up using promo code Notorious or by clicking on the link in the video description, you will get a free pick plus a first-time deposit offer of up to $1,000 in bonus funds, as well as if you play $5 in the pick'em, you receive an additional $100 in bonus funds or in bonus entries. If you're new to Underdog and don't know how the pick'em works, it's incredibly simple. You pick at least 2 players. If both of those picks hit on the higher or the lower, then you win. If you do multiple other picks, then the payout will be higher, but obviously all the other picks have to hit, so make sure you guys do check that out. Promo code Notorious or by clicking on the link in the video description. Now, I talked about the Dolphins very heavily. I talk about them very heavily every week. They're my favorite team, obviously. You can see by the Dolphins flag behind me. I wear Dolphins shirts all the time. I am a ride or die Dolphins fan. And I talked about this talking point in the running back start sit video, right? I said that obviously you have to watch that video if you haven't watched it already. So make sure if you enjoy this fucking masterpiece of a video, you check that out afterwards. I talked about how Jalen Waddle and Devon Achane are like that meme of the Bugatti in front of the mobile home, right? The Dolphins are a complete and utter failure organizationally, and that starts with the owner of the team, Stephen Ross. Regardless of this ineptitude, we still have some studs on this offense, and one of them is Jalen Waddle. Without Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle has taken a giant step for mankind. Shout out to Neil Armstrong. Back-to-back top 17 showings in PPR. He was the wide receiver 17 last week up against the Chargers with 6 receptions on 8 targets for 95 yards. Tua continues to feed Waddle, and Waddle will continue to keep being ranked in the wide receiver 2 range in the 13th best matchup for wide receivers on a per-game basis. I got Mr. Waddle as a high-end wide receiver 2, even in a game with a projected low total. Now, I just want to make something very clear. There are a lot of rumors right now. The birdies are chirping that the Dolphins are going to trade Devon Achane and Jalen Waddle. If they trade Devon Achane and Jalen Waddle. You don't want to know how insane I will go. On Sundays, when I watch the Dolphins fucking crumble like the Ottoman Empire, I just start laughing. It's fucking funny. It's so obvious that's going to happen that it's funny, right? You turn into the Joker. You go full insane mode. If they get rid of my two favorite players on this team, I am going to go ballistic. We still haven't fired our GM, who's been just a fucking failure. Haven't won a playoff game my whole life, but, you know, that guy just gets to keep being employed. Right? Do your job like shit, and you just get to keep it. That must be nice, right? Right? You guys would fire me if I was doing a bad job every single year talking about fantasy football, but yet Chris Grier gets to keep his job. He gets to keep his high horse. I fucking hate that guy. As mean as that might sound, I genuinely cannot stand him. I don't understand how it is possible to be this bad, to be this much of a failure. And if they get rid of Jalen Phillips, get rid of Chubb, I don't care. But if you get rid of Jalen Waddle or Devon Achane, I am going to be just full-on crash out mode. I'm going to be going to take a bath with my fucking toaster plugged in. As someone that sits down and suffers through every Dolphins game when it comes to the other wide receivers here and watches every single snap, I will tell you that Malik Washington kind of feels like he's eventually going to have one of those games where he takes one of those jet sweeps or those screens straight to the cribbo and has a big game. But ultimately, with fewer than 7 PPR points in both games without Tyreek Hill, and this being a low-scoring game environment, I wouldn't project that this game magically becomes the high-scoring game for Malik Washington. I was really excited when the Dolphins brought Nick Westbrook-Ikhine in from the Titans, and I thought he was going to be a large piece of this offense. Even with 60+% of the snaps in back-to-back games, he hasn't even recorded a catch in either game. No reason to even roster him, even if you are in a deeper league. Now, for the Cleveland Browns, Jesus turned water to wine, right? And Jerry Jeudy turned 13 targets into less than 10 PPR points last week in Pittsburgh. How is that even possible? How do you get 13 targets and don't even score 10 PPR points? That is embarrassing. 5 of 13 for 43 yards as the wide receiver 35 in a game in which Gabriel threw the ball 52 times, which I don't expect to happen up against the Dolphins. I expect them to run a train on us with Quinshon Judkins. So even with me being more excited about the offense with Gabriel under center, and even with the Dolphins defense being so bad that it genuinely hurts to watch, they are not a great matchup, though, for the wide receiver position. I want nothing to do with Jeudy, who has only scored more than 10 points a single time this season. Bond, Isaiah Bond, he has a fun nickname. He's the clear wide receiver 2 on the Browns without Cedric Tillman. The problem here is the wide receiver 2 on the Browns has and holds 0 value, especially with how much Gabriel loves to throw the ball to the tight ends. Bond at this point can be cut if you're holding him. He's a clear sit. If you aren't starting the wide receiver 1 or 2 in Cleveland, you certainly aren't starting Jamari Thrash, who doesn't even play more than 50% of the snaps on a weekly basis. Next up, we move to the Las Vegas Raiders going up against the Kansas City Chiefs. The hope here when you play Trey Tucker against the Chiefs in a break glass in case of emergency wide receiver 4 type of play is that the team will be down so bad that the Chiefs are just playing soft defensively. They just stop caring. They are pummeling them, and Geno's throwing the ball a bunch, and Trey Tucker luck boxes himself into some big receptions and maybe even a touchdown. 2 straight games with 11 plus PPR points. And while you can't even be remotely excited about the passing attack with Geno playing like he's got the drunk goggles on, Tucker has been safe enough to quantify starting him. Again, though, not going to have any high expectations for him. Jakobi Meyers may get traded allegedly. Maybe even by the time that this video comes out with how big the drumbeat is on Jakobi Meyers. If he is here, though, in Vegas this week, which is definitely possible, you know, that's what we're going to assume. Expert consensus rankings on Fantasy Pros have him as a top 30 wide receiver, and I really just don't see any way that you can start him. Trey Tucker at this point feels like the only wide receiver I trust on this team, and Myers has been invisible since the first 2 weeks of the season, failing to eclipse 10 points now in 4 straight games, and less than 8 points in 3 straight games. Even with the game script potentially positive down late, get those garbage time points Justin Fields style, I can't do it. If I can't play Jakobi Meyers, who I love with all my heart, I'm a big Jakobi Meyers guy. I've been a fan of him since the Patriots. Talking about him for years now. I'm not playing Jack Besh, who didn't even record a single stat when he played last week. So now we move to the Kansas City Chiefs. My GOAT. Rashee Rice returns this week, and as someone who gave this dude the metaphorical gawk gawk 9,000 special all summer, I am excited to see what he does up against the Raiders in his first game back. Now, in terms of a matchup, this is the 6th best matchup on a per-game basis for the wide receiver position. And I have him ranked as a low-end wide receiver 1 to high-end wide receiver 2. It is important to understand that Rashee Rice has not been practicing with the team for 6 weeks. So while I do believe he is the clear best wide receiver 1 on this team, and I just want you guys to understand that if he comes out the gate, maybe a little slow, I don't expect that. I expect him to play well. But if he comes out the gate a little bit slow, you can't just magically turn on the guy after one game, right? And the team has already came out and made it clear that they're going to allocate a heavy workload to go his way. So with a guy that scored 17 plus PPR points in all 3 games he played last season, I expect big things out of him this year. And if for some reason you don't have him and your league mates are not viewing him as highly as I do or as highly as you do, make sure you trade for him. Like I said, I got him as a low-end wide receiver 1 to high-end wide receiver 2. I expect Worthy to take the back seat with Rashee Rice back in the fold, but that doesn't mean that Worthy will just go back down into the basement like his name was Ron. With how well Mahomes has been playing, he can easily elevate both guys on a weekly basis. Worthy is definitely much more risky now. I obviously will acknowledge that. Shout out to Roman Reigns. But the upside is still very much the same. And in a cakewalk matchup for wide receivers up against the Raiders, I got him as a low-end wide receiver 2. Now, Hollywood Brown hit the Detroit Lions defense last week with every WWE finisher in the book, going 4 for 4 like he was at Wendy's for 45 yards and 2 touchdowns. But, and there's a big but, shout out to Brandy Love, with Rice now back in the fold, while Hollywood will every once in a while have a solid showing, he just seems so much lower down the totem pole right now for me to actually recommend you starting him. Next up, we move to the Philadelphia Eagles at the cold like Minnesota Vikings. If you guys have enjoyed today's video thus far, make sure you guys hit that subscribe button down below like it owes you some money. Now, AJ Brown is essentially kind of just holding your fantasy team captive. He's holding your team hostage. He has to be started. You have to play him because he is getting 8+ targets in 5 straight matchups and has the upside in any given week to legitimately win you your matchup by himself. Put the team on his back, Marshawn Lynch style. Last week, he was solid. He was the wide receiver 19 in a big fat L up against the Giants in MetLife. 6 receptions on 9 targets for 80 yards. His floor is in the lava, though. His floor is legit in the lava because he has burned us multiple times this season, but you have to keep playing him. In the worst matchup for wide receivers on a per-game basis, I'm still playing him because the upside's there, low-end wide receiver 2. Just like A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith has your team tied up in the basement. You can't ever sit the guy because you know that in any given game, the dude can just drop his nutsack in the mouth of a random defense, but his floor is also in the mud. Last week, we saw an all-right game out of him, wide receiver 37 with 4 receptions on 5 targets. Now, I don't expect much in this matchup, but the upside is too good for me to mark him as a sit. Especially since the Eagles just lost back-to-back games, and I think they're going to be angry. You're not going to like me when I'm angry, right? They're going to be all pissed off, right? Like in The Shining, when he's got the axe, and he's like, here's Johnny, and he's cutting the door down to his wife, Shelley Duvall, who apparently got really messed up from that movie. Interesting tidbit of information. I watched The Shining when I was in high school, and that scene, we were in film studies class because I'm a film enthusiast, as you guys might know. Follow me on Letterboxd, NotoriousFantasy. I love movies. I watched over 150 movies this year. I'm not as much of a movie guy as like, oh, I've watched 150 films, right? I'm not that much of a fucking movie snob, but that scene where the dude's dressed as like a dog, he's like a furry, and he's sucking the dude off, that might have been the most uncomfortable I've ever been in a classroom setting outside of earlier on in the movie when that, or maybe it's after that scene where, I think it's before that, where the lady's in the bath and she's like old as fuck and there's just titties everywhere. Real weird movie. Real weird movie. I liked it though. I do like The Shining. And it scared the fuck out of me when I watched it. I'm not going to lie. I'm someone that gets scared very easily. I'm not a big horror movie guy. My favorite horror movie is Scream. But I don't even think that's as much of a scary movie as something like The Shining, which genuinely did scare me. I know, Nick, you're a pussy, haha. I know. But yeah, what I was actually saying here is, again, the Eagles have lost 2 in a row. They're going to be angry. They're going to be mad. I think they're going to actually play pretty well here. But again, the matchup's pretty bad. So he's just a high-end wide receiver 3. Jahan Dotson gets a lot of snaps on a weekly basis, but barely touches the football. He hasn't scored more than 4 points since week 1. Even if the Eagles offense comes back in tip-top shape, Dotson is not someone that should even be rostered or started. For the Minnesota Vikings, as we are sitting here right now on Wednesday, we have no clue who the starting quarterback will be. I think it will end up being Carson Wentz, who is banged up. So that isn't ideal, but either way, like the fact that he's hurt isn't ideal. Wentz has been good with Justin Jefferson, but Jefferson's put up back-to-back top 11 finishes, 11 targets in both games with over 120 yards in each game. You will play Jefferson regardless of who the quarterback is. If I was the quarterback, you're probably still playing Justin Jefferson. So I got him as a top 6 quarterback. Jordan, I want a bad bitch. Addison Ray has been a top 24 wide receiver in back-to-back showings, and even with him allegedly spending the night out after curfew overseas, the guy still performed after being benched early on in the game. The Eagles matchup is mid-range for wide receivers, so I'll just keep believing in Addison until he proves us otherwise. So I got him as a mid-range wide receiver number 3. Jalen Naylor, I barely knew her, picks up the scraps in this offense. No real interest in J.J. McCarthy or Carson Wentz's wide receiver 3. Next up, we got the Carolina Panthers at the New York Jumbo Jets. Now, Tedero McMillan had his coming out party last week up against the Cowboys. I've been praying for this moment the whole season, and it finally paid off. My boy went bananas. Him and Drake London going crazy the same week brought tears straight to my eyes. Straight to my eyes. If they happened at the same time, man, oh man, it would have been waterworks over there. Like my wife, when she sees my fantasy record, just waterworks, but in a different way, you know what I'm saying? Then nice. Wide receiver 13 with 3 receptions on 5 targets for 29 yards and 2 touchdowns. Obviously, just 5 targets would be a concern. If we didn't see the first 5 games of the season where he had 8+ targets every single week, I expect Bryce to continue to feed T-Mac. While this is a below-average matchup for wide receivers, with how the Panthers' offense has looked over the last few games, I expect Tet to show up again as a mid-range wide receiver number 2. Jalen Coker is reportedly close to returning. I love Jalen Coker, and I expect him to fit like a glove, O.J. Simpson style in this offense. He popped off a few times last year, but ultimately, if this does end up being his first game back, I don't really see a reason to roll the dice, especially since he might not come out the gate as the wide receiver 2. I think he will, though, quickly become that. Xavier, somebody thought you might Leggett. I know someone out there, probably not one of you guys, but someone was probably tricked into playing Xavier Leggett out there after he scored up against the Dolphins. But as I said last week, scoring up against the Dolphins is easy, right? It's like telling your buddies you finally lost your virginity, but it was to a prostitute, right? Anyone can score on the Dolphins. Anyone can have sex with a prostitute, okay? It's not impressive. Leave him on your waivers. On Tuesday, we learned that Garrett Wilson hyperextended his knee, and it's actually very sad to yell Wilson like that when the guy's hurt, so apologize. Apologize, like I'm asking someone to apologize. I apologize. My bad. Hyperextended his knee and is now expected to miss a couple of weeks. Lower the flag. Half-mast for Garrett Wilson. Hope Garrett Wilson ends up okay. This elevates Josh Reynolds into the wide receiver 1 role. And while maybe one of these guys has a good game, Arian Smith, who the fuck is that guy? Tyler Johnson. You're just not trusting them. Like, I wouldn't even be shocked if Mason Taylor had like 15+ targets and the rest of the guys just picked up the scraps. So just sit all the Jets wide receivers. Now we got the New England Deflatriots at the Tennessee Titans. Last week, I talked up Stephon Diggs very, very heavily. I talked about how I thought he was going to have a great game. I talked about how his baby mama, Cardi B, has some big areolas. And after 2 great games, I thought the guy was back. He's back. In week 4 and week 5, he played so good. But then he just drank a fucking invisibility potion from Minecraft last week in New Orleans. 3 receptions on 3 targets for 28 yards. In a game in which Kayshon Boutte and Demario Douglas Eiffel Towered the Saints defense with not 1, not 2, 3 total touchdowns between the pair. I think Diggs should bounce back, though, but my confidence level is definitely dwindling after what I saw last week. Because even with the offense looking great, we might be in for a solid case here of, the Packers, where talk about this all the time. You get the ball, you all get the ball. The Oprah Winfrey offense, where check under your seat, you also got the fucking ball, okay? And that's not ideal. for Stefon Diggs, but I still think Stefon Diggs is the guy. I still think he's the safest bet out of this group. Not going to full on panic after one game, but definitely not as excited. Like, I think I'd be lying to you if I was like, oh, I'm so excited. I mean, this is a slightly above average matchup, though, up against the Titans, so I got him as a low-end wide receiver, too, and I hope the consistency comes back, because if it does, and he is the clear wide receiver 1 in this offense, I think he could finish as like a mid-range wide receiver 2 for the rest of the season. Kayshon Boutte flashed with the brightness of high beams when you're driving at 3 a.m. back from McDonald's and you're going just a little bit too slow for the asshole driving behind you. 5 receptions on 5 targets for 93 yards and 2 touchdowns. And as the wide receiver 4, now, if this is going to be the new norm, then great. But we saw this earlier on in the season. He flashes in week 1 up against the Raiders as the wide receiver 17, and then he fails to score 9 PPR points in 4 straight games afterwards until last week. Just one big game doesn't magically make me jump on the bandwagon. He is still a sit, even if this was like the best matchup ever. The Mario Douglas going 3 of 4 for 71 yards and a touchdown is just so unlikely to happen. With him playing just 20 to 30% of the snaps, I would leave him on the waivers. Alec Iomanner should be the wide receiver 1 because Calvin Ridley was hurt with the hamstring injury during last week's game up against the Raiders. If Ridley does return, I am not playing him. I think that the firing of Brian Callahan can zap this offense, Hassan style, back into shape. Now, if you understood that reference, I fucking can't stand that guy. What a weirdo that guy is. Shocking your dog because he or she moves like 2 feet into the camera. Sicko behavior. And I'm not someone that, just gets mad at like slight things. That's just crazy to do. Like, just shocking your dog because it doesn't stay still. Like, I think those shock collar things are pretty messed up in a scenario like that. But I really don't think you can start any of these Titans wide receivers with just how bad the offense looks moving the ball and with just how bad Cam Ward has looked. My thoughts may change after this game, but as of right now, as they're basically just a straight up avoid as a whole as an offense, like if you just didn't draft a single Titan, you're probably feeling fantastic right now. Even in the 11th best matchup for wide receivers, I can't do it. No Tyler Lockett in my pocket skirt. No Van Jefferson as well. Now we move to the 4 p.m. slate of games on Sunday with the New York Football Giants at the Denver Broncos. Now, Darius Slayton missed last week with a hamstring injury. Even when healthy, though, despite his snap counts in the offense being relatively high, he has not really been remotely involved. If he does play, Wan'Dale is still the wide receiver I trust the most in New York with the Giants. Wan'Dale was the wide receiver 9 last week with 7 receptions for 84 yards and a touchdown. This is a rough spot for Wan'Dale Robinson with the 31st best matchup for wide receivers on a per game basis. I don't think we necessarily see Patrick Surtain shadow him, so he should be fine based off of his floors like a high-end wide receiver 3, but definitely don't be expecting what we saw last week up against the Broncos. Jalen Hyatt was the wide receiver 70 last week. Anyone not named Wan'Dale Robinson without Malik is just a clear sit, in my opinion. Same thing goes with Little Jordan Humphrey, which is just such a fire name. I love saying it. And Little Jordan Humphrey actually looked pretty good last week, but him and Dart did seem on the same page at points. Seemed like completely on opposite pages at other points. Again, it's the Broncos. Like, are you really going to start Little Jordan Humphrey? Like, come on, no, you're not. Now, for the Denver Broncos, Courtland Sutton has been awesome this season as a whole with 4 of 6 games inside the top 16 in PPR. But when he has been bad, it has been awful, right? Like the saying, when it rains, it pours. That has been the scenario with Courtland Sutton, right? In his 2 games outside the top 16, he has scored fewer than 3 fantasy points in each game. One of those bad showings was in London last week up against the Jets with 1 reception on 3 targets for 17 yards. I expect him to get back on track against the other New Jersey team, the Giants, this week at home in Mile High. Don't need to panic after 1 down game, as last time he completely screwed us big time. He followed that up as the wide receiver 3. I got him as a low-end wide receiver 1 this week in the 3rd best matchup on a weekly basis for wide receivers up against the Giants. I like Troy Franklin, but with his targets bouncing all over the place and with fewer than 10 fantasy points in 5 of 6 games, I am unwilling to chance it at this point in the season with just 2 teams on bye, even in a wet dream matchup here. With Evan Ingram back in the fold and Marvin Mims live to just randomly appear and have a big game, Franklin is a bench stash at best. Marvin Mims will either score 5 fantasy points or 20 fantasy points, and there really is no in between. And there's also really never any rhyme or reason as to why the big games actually happen. So you can't trust him. Thus, I'm not starting him, especially with less than 40% of the snaps in back-to-back games. Next up, we move to the "this is our Colts, this is our team, we bleed blue," going up against the Los Angeles Superchargers in SoFi. Michael Pittman has been just like Courtland Sutton. He has either been scorching hot or ice cold this season. You either play him and he's a locked and loaded top 24 option at minimum with the upside of busting off 20 plus PPR points as a top 12 option, or he shits the bed and absolutely steamrolls you. 4 games inside the top 22, 2 games outside the top 60. Last week up against the Cardinals was one of those down games. 2 receptions on 3 targets for 20 yards. With 4 total touchdowns though, through 6 games on the season, I feel like a bounce back game here is going to occur. Gotta keep rocking with Michael Pittman, even in a rough matchup on paper with the Chargers allowing the 30th most points to wide receivers on a per game basis. Due to the matchup, again, I'm still going to rock with them, and I do think this could be a real high scoring back and forth rock'em sock'em robots affair. But again, you got to follow the matchups a lot of times. The matchup is tough like this, and Pittman just fell flat on his face. I don't want to bang the drum aggressively and be like, oh, he's still a top 12 receiver. Oh, he's still top 18. He's a low-end wide receiver too, but I do think he gets back on the saddle this week. Shout out to John Marston. Josh Touchdowns appears to be back over the last 2 weeks. Back-to-back games with 11 plus PPR points and 7 plus targets in both games. Last week, 6 receptions on 7 targets for 42 yards and a touchdown. His snap share is very concerning, as he is very unlikely to even crack the 60+% mark and has been around the 50% mark in back-to-back weeks. In a rough matchup, he's just kind of in that YOLO start wide receiver 4 range. For the other Colts here, Alec Pierce does outsnap Josh Downs, but Josh Downs is just much more reliable. 2 receptions on 4 targets last week for 48 yards for Alec Pierce. One of these days, he's going to have that huge receiving touchdown, and people will be mad that they don't pick him up, and maybe they will even trap themselves into picking him up, and then they play him and he scores like 3 points. It's like trying to crack the Da Vinci Code. It's impossible. And I think Downs might start to get more and more of a cut of this offense, and that would just make Alec Pierce fall even further down, so I'm not willing to start him. For the Chargers, this is a complicated situation to break down because as of right now, we don't know if Quentin Johnston will actually play or not. He only practiced in limited fashion last week, dealing with the hamstring injury, and did not end up playing, so his availability for this week is very much in question. For the purpose of today's video, we're just going to assume that he's in. But we should be more informed on this topic by Friday when I make the wide receiver rankings video that you should be subscribed to watch because it's a great time as well. So, Ladd McConkey absolutely diced up my Dolphins defense last week and caught the dagger last week straight into my heart. 7 receptions on 9 targets for 100 yards and a touchdown as the wide receiver 6 in Miami. Now, that is back-to-back weeks with the touchdown, so it's safe to say maybe Ladd McConkey's back. If Quentin Johnston misses again, Ladd is a mid-range wide receiver 2. If QJ is back, he's more of a lower-end wide receiver 2. But right now, I feel the most confident with Ladd McConkey out of this trio in the 5th best matchup for wide receivers this week. Keenan Allen has fallen off over the last 3 weeks. It's like Quentin Johnston stole all of his fucking life energy here, which is very sad. While he is still seeing a similar amount of targets, the 3 straight top 18 finishes to start off the year has now turned into 3 straight games outside the top 38. Keenan is still very involved with 7 plus targets per week, so eventually he's going to pop off again, and if there was a game to do it, it would be here. So if QJ is in, he's a high-end wide receiver 3. If he is out, he is a high-end, low-end wide receiver 2. I apologize. I would prefer, again, it's in order on the screen. If QJ is in, I prefer Ladd, Keenan, QJ. If QJ is out, it's Ladd, and then Keenan with QJ being on your bench because he's not playing. So Quentin Johnston, if he was to play, you are going to play him, right? Because in week number 5, he was a top 23 wide receiver, besides week number 5, I should say, sorry. The first 4 games of the season, top 23 wide receiver in 4 straight games. In such a positive matchup this week, like we've just been discussing, we've been, getting down on our knees and giving the Gawk 9000 special to this matchup. QJ should be a high-end wide receiver 3. But I do think it's important to understand that I could rank him higher, but I think the hamstring injury will just kind of impact his play, and that will make him play worse. So that top 12 upside might be severely handicapped here. Next up, we got the Green Bay Packers at the Arizona Cardinals. Back-to-back games with 8+ targets for Romeo Doubs would make him, on paper, appear to be the wide receiver 1 on this team. He scored 3 touchdowns back in week number 4 prior to the bye, and you know that this offense has big upside on a weekly basis. Facing the Cardinals in a slightly below-average matchup for wide receivers, I got Doubs in the same spot that I'm kind of going to always have him as like a mid-range wide receiver 3. Matthew Golden-Scar looked great last week against the Bengals. 3 receptions on 5 targets for 86 yards as the wide receiver 22, with 2 rushes for 16 yards. If he can't get more than 5 targets, though, it is tough to envision him being like a reliable wide receiver 2. He's in the top 38 range because that's what he has done in 3 straight games, right? He is a low-end wide receiver 3. Just like Doubs, he's just not a guy you want to rely heavily on. You don't want Doubs or Golden in as your wide receiver 1, but if they're in your flex, your wide receiver 3 spot, you don't feel that bad about it. Dontavian John Wicks is by far the easiest wide receiver to break down in Green Bay just because he barely touches the ball and hasn't scored more than 9 points a single time this season, so I would leave him on waivers. Now, on paper, which we have used already twice inside of just one section. So I apologize, we need another synonym or whatever the fuck you call that, new adjective, maybe. I don't know. I was bad at, what was that called? Mad Libs when you were a kid. And you know, that just shows how stupid I am. I was like, what's an adjective? What's a noun, right? And I know that's embarrassing. But like when you're like in 4th grade, I had no fucking, I know we learned it. I just couldn't remember, okay? Sorry. Fucking sue me, okay? On paper, on the computer screen, you would think Michael Wilson will be the wide receiver 1 with Marvin Harrison Jr. seemingly out with the concussion, but that would not be the case, as last week Wilson was outsnapped by Zay Jones. Michael Wilson was 4 of 5 for 44 yards, with Zay Jones going 5 of 8 for 79 yards as the wide receiver 23 in Indy. So if you need an upside bye-week fill-in or a Marvin Harrison Jr. replacement, your guy would be Zay Jones. But in all reality, I would prefer just not to have to deal with this situation, regardless of who the quarterback is in a above-average matchup here. Greg Dortch is so far out of the picture that it isn't even worthy of like really spending time discussing him. I know he scored a touchdown last week, but a blind squirrel finds a nut every once in a while, so not going to be talking about him. Next up, we got the left hands up. Who are we? The Commanders. The final game before we discuss Sunday night, and then the doubleheader on Monday Night Football. So again, if you guys have enjoyed, make sure you guys hit the like button, please. I'm begging you. I'm on my hands and my knees right now. Please like the video. It helps me out. If you're new, hit that subscribe button. The left hands up. Who are we? The Commanders at the Dallas, Washington. The Dallas, Washington. This is what happens when you record for 40 plus minutes, bro. Your brain, you just fucking forget what you're saying, okay? Terry McLaurin has, the Dallas Cowboys, Terry McLaurin has missed 3 games in a row and will practice this week with a quad injury, which to me makes things seem kind of on the up and up, and that, you know, maybe he's likely to return. Now, if he doesn't return this week, then you would think it would have to be next week up against the Chiefs. But based on that report, you know, we will just operate in the scenario that he's in, okay? Maybe that's wrong. Maybe we're just off base. But to talk about it in today's video, again, we'll talk about more on Friday. There's more news. We'll just assume he's in, okay? Sometimes assumptions make an ass out of you and me, but we're going to make that assumption. Debo has really showed out this season. And while sadly he hasn't been able to find the end zone, last week in a fun game up against the Bears, he was 4 of 5 for 15 yards and 1 rush for -1 yards. 1 down game shouldn't sour your opinion on Debo, who's been a top 12 wide receiver in 3 of 6 games and top 17 in 4 of 6 games against a Dallas Cowboys defense that couldn't stop fucking radio if he ran a route up against Dallas, which is the best matchup on paper for wide receivers. We saw Mr. Tedero McMillan take full advantage of that last week. I love Debo to bounce back as a top 12 wide receiver. If Terry was to miss, he would probably creep into the top 10. Do the creep. I did a Lonely Island reference last video. We did it again. If Terry is in, I would play him as a high-end wide receiver 3. You might be thinking, Nick, why? Why do you not have him ranked higher? This is such a good matchup. This is such a juicy matchup, such a delectable matchup. Terry, when healthy early on the season, he was on the struggle bus. I just want to be honest with you. He was struggling, and I do think Terry will have a strong finish to the season when healthy. And once him and Jaden Stormy Daniels get on the same page, that's going to work. But as of right now, he is not trustworthy enough to rank him higher than a high-end wide receiver 3. Christian McCaffrey's little bro, Luke McCaffrey, found the end zone last week against the Bears. 1 reception on 1 target for 33 yards and a touchdown, with the rise of Chris Moore's snaps as well, who also scored last week. Even if McLaurin does not return, I wouldn't be playing McCaffrey, Chris Moore, or Jalen. Stay in your lane. For the Dallas Cowboys, CeeDee Lamb has a chance to return. If he does return, you're obviously going to start him. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure that out. He will practice today on Wednesday as a must-start top 6 option. There is no ifs, ands, or buts about it. He has missed the last 3 games with a high ankle sprain. So with the team never placing him on IR, if he doesn't play this week, then that was kind of stupid that they didn't do that. High ankle sprains are rough. Now, I've never had a high ankle sprain, but from watching football for a while, I know they are definitely rough. But you know, when he plays, you're not going to fucking sit CeeDee Lamb. Prior to his injury in week 3, he was a top 14 wide receiver in back-to-back weeks to start off the season against a Commanders defense that allows the 11th most points to wide receivers on a per-game basis. I feel great about CeeDee Lamb this week, assuming that he does play. If CeeDee Lamb does play, then you're still playing George Pickens. This man is on fire like the shirtwaist factory. Wide receiver 1 last week in Carolina with 9 receptions on 11 targets for 168 yards and a touchdown. 5 straight games with at least 1 touchdown and 6 touchdowns in that stretch. If CD is in, I got him as a top 12 wide receiver. If CD is out, then Pickens moves up to be a top 6 wide receiver. I love this spot for Pickens to keep up his high pedigree of play. Ryan Flournoy continues to look good, but even if CD is out and this good of a matchup, I would just prefer not to risk it with him, especially with how much Jake Ferguson is utilized. And because Jalen Tolbert could easily outsnap him and out-target him. Now we move to, cause you waited all day for Sunday night, the Atlanta Falcons at the San Francisco 49ers on Sunday Night Football. My boy, Drizzy Drake London, the wide receiver I went to bat the most for this summer, has been riding high. Back-to-back top 5 showings with over 110 yards and a touchdown, and he would have had another touchdown last week if he could stretch his arms like Pedro Pascal in the Fantastic Four. Last week against the Bills, he put him on a t-shirt, nothing short of it. Wide receiver 2 with 10 receptions on 16 targets for 158 yards and a touchdown. This dude had 16 targets, and I won't be surprised if he gets 10 plus again. Him and Michael Penix have an A1 steak sauce connection. In a mid-range matchup here, I expect him to Hulk smash this week as a top 8 wide receiver. Then we move to Darnell. Here comes the Mooney. Now, Mooney has been dealing with a hamstring injury, missed last week against Buffalo. Even if he does play, though, you won't catch me starting him based on what we have seen when he was healthy. Ray McLeod was a healthy scratch last week, and Casey Washington saw 80% of the snaps with 2 targets for 0 yards. Even with Mooney potentially not back, I don't even, why bother? Like, what's the reasoning? For the 49ers, we will know more news today on Wednesday regarding the quarterback situation, as well as the health of Ricky Rolex, Ricky Pearsall. My thoughts as we sit here right now is that Ricky may play, but Mac Jones is probably going to be under center again. He has played well enough to really have no need to force Brock Purdy back into the saddle. Last time out, Kendrick Bourne was the wide receiver 11 in Tampa Bay with 5 receptions on 9 targets for 142 yards with back-to-back top 12 showings. If Ricky is out again, I feel very strongly about Kendrick's upside, but, and there's a big but, shout out to Mia Malkova, this is a bad matchup for wide receivers, so you have to be cautious about a comeback down-to-earth moment. With the upside alone, though, I got him as a high-end wide receiver number 2. In high school, there was always those girls that were constantly injured, right? Constantly injured, and they just wouldn't do anything in gym class, right? For 3 months, they have a sprained wrist, and then once that heals, by the grace of the fucking gods, their foot is now messed up, right? And that's just kind of how Juwan Jennings is, except for he's actually hurt, right? He's playing through 5 broken ribs, as well as a high and low ankle sprain. He doesn't just have a high ankle sprain. He doesn't just have a low ankle sprain. He has a high and a low ankle sprain. I get that a lot of people try to play him this week, but with him being hobbled and with his targets not being too high last week, just 3 for 1 reception and 7 yards, no way I am playing Jennings this week, especially with the rough matchup. And if Ricky returns, I think Bourne will be the wide receiver number 2. Even without Ricky and with Jennings banged up, Demarcus Robinson played just 19% of snaps last week, so he should be left chilling on your waiver wire. Now we move to the first of 2 Monday Night Football games, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers at the Detroit Lions, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time kickoff. Emeka Egbuka is expected to be out with the hamstring injury, and while I'm as much of a doctor as Johnny Sins, I would think the smart move is for him to miss this week, and miss next week in New Orleans and then return after the bye that they have in week number 9. So he returns in week number 10 versus the Patriots. Again, this is just my opinion. I'm not a doctor. I do not know for sure. In my opinion, without Igbukah, we are in for a healthy dosage of Tez Johnson and General Sterling Shepard, as well as probably a decent amount of Cade Otton. Tez was the guy to have last week, 72% of the snaps. Shepard played 49%, and Cameron Johnson played 49% with Ryan Miller playing 25%. Tez had 1 reception on 3 targets for 45 yards and to score. Beautiful touchdown. Beautiful touchdown. And he thought the crowd was chanting MVP at him. Obviously, they were talking about Baker, which was just a very funny interview after the game. I think he will be a more risky bet compared to Sterling Shepard, but I think the upside is significant for both guys in what should be a super high-scoring game. In the 4th best matchup for wide receivers on a weekly basis, he is in that wide receiver 4 YOLO start range, right? I'm not going to sit here and pretend like, oh, I really trust Tez Johnson. No, I don't. Now, if Mike Evans does return for the hamstring injury that he hasn't practiced on since the injury in week 3, then just flush these dudes down the toilet, Flushed Away, which is a great film, and you would play Evans as a top 24 wide receiver. Shepard was 2 of 3 last week for 51 yards, just like Tez Johnson. I think there's clear risk here, but if you are looking for a safer bet of the two, I would lean with Shepard. Both guys, though, in that wide receiver 4 YOLO start range. Cameron Johnson was 4 for 4 for 64 yards and a score last week. I do think if Evans is out, he is by far the biggest dart throw option on this team out of the guys that we've discussed because he played the least amount of snaps out of the trio. So I would prefer to leave him on waivers. For the Detroit Lions, Amon-Ra St. Brown, if he's your wide receiver 1, you didn't even need to click on this video. You already knew he was in your lineup, right? He's been one of the most reliable wide receivers in fantasy football this season. Outside of week 1, where he was silent like the night Santa Claus came, up against the Packers in Lambeau as the wide receiver 47. He has been a top 20 wide receiver in 5 straight games in PPR, and he has been a top 7 wide receiver in 3 of 6 games. My confidence level in Amon-Ra St. Brown will always be sky high. 9 receptions on 10 targets for 45 yards and 1 rush for 2 yards last week, facing a mid-range matchup up against the Bucs. I feel great about Amon-Ra St. Brown as a top 3 wide receiver. Jameson Williams, you kind of go with him and you live by the sword and you die by the sword with him. J-Mo has played in all 6 games this season for the Lions and has had 2 games as the wide receiver 12. Every single other game he has finished outside the top 50 and hasn't even come within sniffing a 10 PPR point showing. It is very clear that J-Mo is boom or bust. If you are willing to take the shot, which I would be in the 2nd highest projected Vegas scoring total of the week, the ceiling is the moon. I got him as a high-end wide receiver 3. Until Isaac Tesla sees a legit workload, he should remain on waivers. The skill is there, but with him not even being guaranteed to get a single target, you don't even need him to be on your bench. Now we move to the 2nd Monday Night Football game. 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Stay up to 1 a.m. EST to watch the Houston Texans versus the Seattle Seahawks. Nico Cousin, let's go bowling. Collins hasn't been as great as I thought he would be this season, but has been pretty reliable. Outside of week 1, where he was the wide receiver 65 in LA against the Rams, he has been a top 30 wide receiver in 4 straight showings going into the bye. The last time out in Baltimore, he had 4 receptions on 5 targets for 52 yards and a score, as well as his only rush this season for 8 yards, 3 touchdowns through 5 games. And while the O-line will always be a massive concern for me in this offense, Stroud getting more comfortable recently has me much more confident with Nico Collins. I got him ranked as a top 10 option and a top 15 matchup for wide receivers up against the Seahawks. Christian Kirk continues to not be able to rise up the offense, and with the utilization of Xavier Hutchinson and Jaden Higgins rising, Christian Kirk should be on your waivers. Jaden Higgins did receive his highest snap share of the season in the last game out prior to the bye, so maybe the team leans more into him going forward, but with my feelings of this offense as a whole right now, like I said with Christian Kirk and the rise utilization of Xavier Hutchinson as well, I would rather just wait for him to pop off before I throw him into my lineup. For the Seattle Seahawks, JSN's another one of these guys where you just know you play him, another one of the most consistent wide receivers in fantasy football. And with Sam Darnold looking better and better and better and more comfortable in this offense every single week, he has just been incredible. There really isn't much to say about JSN. The guy is nothing short of fantastic. Back-to-back games with the wide receiver 3. Last week in Duval against the Jaguars, he had 8 receptions on 13 targets for 162 yards and a touchdown, marking back-to-back games with 130-plus yards and a touchdown. JSN is a locked and loaded top 3 option, and if you have him on your team, you already knew that. Even in one of the worst matchups for wide receivers on a per-game basis, I have unwavering confidence in JSN. fine. Now, Cooper Kupp's targets have been bouncing all up and down like my titties when I run on the treadmill, because during the football season, I just eat like shit and I get a little bit chubby. I won't lie. This is a trust circle. Don't judge. Please don't judge, It's just a joke. I don't fucking care. People say crazy things in the comment section. Don't get to me, okay? I've heard it all, basically. Someone told me I looked like, shit, who was it? You ever seen Super Meat Boy? Is that what it's called? Where it's like, I used to watch when I was a kid. I thought it was pretty funny. It's like the two guys are like the hamburger fast food restaurant guys, and they just look so disgusting. Someone said I looked like one of those guys, which I don't really see it, but it was kind of funny. I do kind of see it, actually, because I do have, I have eczema, so my eyes get a little bit pink, and it just makes me look a little bit weird, which, it's okay. It's okay. It's okay. Don't worry about it. I'm okay. I'm fine. I'm just fucking around with you guys. We are way too deep in this video for trying to make all types of jokes, right? Cooper Kupp, dude, he 2 receptions on 3 targets for 40 yards last week with the touchdown. Prior to that, he had 9 targets against the Bucs in such a bad matchup. I don't know why you would even roll the dice with the guy as unreliable as him. While Torrey Horton, here's a who, does live in the end zone with 3 touchdowns in 6 games, he has yet to receive more than 4 targets in a single game this season. He has pulled in less than 3 fantasy points in 3 of 6 games. He is just touchdown or bust, and with this matchup being so bad, there's no way I would chance it with him. So thank you guys all so much for watching. If you did up enjoy, make sure you guys hit that subscribe button down below. Whether you are new to the channel or not, make sure you leave a like on today's video. It'd help me out a ton. Check out one of the videos on the screen if you haven't seen them already. Love you a long time. As always, good boy!